1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
By the 10th anniversary in 1967, Monterey was where it was at. The family of artists included Dizzy Gillespie and Carmen McRae, who were having as much fun on stage as off, and European artists were invited to jam. 1967 marked the end of an adventurous decade. By the festival's 10th anniversary, a Saturday afternoon devoted to the blues was on its way to becoming a mainstay.
Blues and jazz, they all have the same roots, so I think Monterey recognized that, and it was all part of the same thing. That's what the celebration was all about.
Absolutely.
blues time.
As early as 1959, Jimmy Lyons had coaxed one of his dear friends and a great blues singer out of retirement.
Jimmy Lyons had tried to get a hold of and finally found in Covington, Kentucky, which is across the river from, and Jimmy Witherspoon. And he hired him, but Spoon called him back about a week or so later and said, well, I sure like to have the job and all, but I can't get there. So Jimmy wired him enough money to buy a used car, and he drove out.
That's trust for you right there.
We were talking earlier about how Monterey is this family gathering. And then there's a story about Jimmy Witherspoon's mother.
Well, it turns out that she was a very religious lady. And she could never bring herself to go into a place where Jimmy was making his living because they sold liquor there. So he's in the middle of the set. In fact, it's on the record. He said, I know it's not protocol and all that, but the woman who's the most in my life is here tonight. I want you all to welcome my mother, Eva Witherspoon.
That's beautiful.
So, it was that sort of thing that here he was. I would imagine by then he was probably in his early 40s. And it's the first time his mother had ever had an opportunity to see him outside of probably when he's a kid singing in church.
Lyons also found the great pianist Earl Father Hines hidden away in the doldrums of a Dixieland club in San Francisco. He provided Hines with an all-star lineup that consisted of Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, Roy Eldridge, and Woody Herman.
Then, at that point, when the place was, really just kind of lifting off the ground, they brought Spoon out, and Spoon did this wonderful album, which is probably one of the better things that in blues that been, it's just a marvelous bit of Spoon,
Jimmy Lyons asked me one time, why don't you do something on the blues on one of our Sunday afternoons, And I said, something on the blues? Yeah, something on the blues, right, okay, sure.
Hendrix responded to Lyons' request with the evolution of the blues song in 1960, one of the most remarkable and popular musical events ever staged at Monterey.
I didn't know what I was writing when I was writing it. I was watching the pencil and seeing what would come out, It was revealed to me. And as we were going up the steps for the opening, I was still writing, and John Lewis was nervous, and he says, aren't you ready? I said, never. And I thought he'd have a heart attack. I said, don't worry, everything's cool, everything's cool.
In spite of the spontaneous nature of its birth, the commissioned piece, The Evolution of the Blues Song, was an instant success, the first jazz program ever reported in the headlines of a large metropolitan newspaper. Jazz story brings tears at festival, wrote Ralph Gleason in the San Francisco Chronicle. We
did it before 9,500 people. and it was 92 degrees in the shade. And people applauded for 20 minutes, and nobody moved. And then when we came out from backstage, my wife and I, there were 3,000 people on the lawn. And we were wondering how we were going to get out of there. And I said, well, just follow me. And I started walking. And the people parted silently. There was no noise. Nobody said a word. If you can picture 3,000 people, all silent, it's the most spiritual thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
I'm gonna shout, I'm gonna sing. Tell you people what you wanna hear. Shout and sing, praise my God, cause everything happened in the house of the Lord. Everything started in the house of the Lord. Everything started in the house. Oh, Lord,
The blues was no stranger to the Monterey Jazz Festival. Jimmy Witherspoon had done his business. John Hendricks made his case in point with the evolution of the blues, and Jimmy Rushing did his thing. But it wasn't until 1964 that the blues became a Saturday afternoon tradition.
are you ready for the blues? We ain't having church up in here today. You thought you had found a good girl?
I just remember one blues day when all these wonderful blues singers were on the stage, and Joe Williams was going to appear the next day, so he was backstage. He said, come on out, Joe, come on out and sing something. He says, there's nothing left.
The vibe was a lot different with the blues night, too. Around people were going crazy, singing, dancing, partying. It's a whole nother kind of audience.
Yeah, they were dancing the chairs and all around the stands.
Dancing naked at one point, too. Got a little out there.
Yeah.
She would embarrass you anywhere, make her friends think that she didn't care. Give it a chance, I've been begging you. I just wanna take care of you, and I wanna tell Mama all about it. Tell Mama what you need. Tell Mama what you want, and I'll make everything all right. She would embarrass you anywhere, make her friends think that she didn't care. Give me the chance, I've been begging you. I just wanna take care of you, and I wanna.
Saturday afternoon became the day at Monterey. By 1967, Ralph Gleason wrote that rock music had more to say about what was happening in America than jazz, and he convinced Lyons to add rock to the Saturday afternoon lineup.
I think that was one of the of Ralph Gleason's shifting interests, and I didn't think much of that because they were going to get there into the same trap that destroyed Newport Festival. You can't do two things. You can't be greedy and do it. You have to do what you're going to do and stay with it.
The party was now out of hand. In 1971, co-founder Ralph Gleason reported that the Monterey Jazz Festival was awash in a sea of booze. Monterey was no longer the realization of a dream, but had become a 3-day free-form bash, which increasingly degenerated into little to do with actual music. He and Jimmy Lyons remained friends, but the 60s set a dangerous party precedent that would return to haunt its reputation in the future.